Marty, I have to tell you, I'm so excited about doing this video with you. We have so many years of experience behind us. I've got 50 years. You've got what? Got to probably be about 40 odd,
48 and
40,
counting.
48 years.
Another 48 to go.
It's just unbelievable how many companies we started, all the things that we've been through, and I'm sure a lot of the aspiring entrepreneurs that are looking at this promo about you and I, and why are we doing this? Why are we doing this masterclass? How would you respond to that?
I think it's basically to give back, maybe leave a bit of a legacy, but I think the primary reason is giving back. You just, when you're in a position that you and I are fortunate enough to be in, you just can't take this stuff to the grave. This is way too important. And also, I think we were once in the position where we were aspiring entrepreneurs. We were looking for, the mentorship, we were looking for the guidance, and I don't know where you found yours. Maybe you want to share that with us, and where, I can explain where I found mine. But at the end of the day, this is just, it's a give back, and it would just be a shame to take all of this knowledge and this expertise that we have and not pass this along to others who are looking to aspire.
I think you're absolutely right. I remember when I was younger, I used to, I take my kids in the early days, I take them to Florida, and we went in the summertime because actually that was the low rate of the year. And I'd be in the swimming pool and my kids might be resting with my wife, whatever. And I would see an old group of guys congregating in another part of the pool. I always made a point of going over, listening to what they had to say, and asking them a lot of questions. I wanted to have a lot of questions answered, because I always believed us old guys, we have so much to share with all these young aspiring entrepreneurs. We've got stories that we're going to be telling. I've got so many stories that I want to relate to the team just for the fun of sharing them, and in the hope that the listeners are going to gain something that's going to catapult them to some great success. When you think about it, Marty, what do we really have to offer, though? What are the things that we've been through as, I'd say, successful entrepreneurs?
It's interesting you use the word success, Joel, because I think what we have almost more to offer is our failures. I really believe that a true entrepreneur is one who fails more than anybody else. And I think a lot of people say that failure is the opposite of success, wherein I think it's actually very much a part of success. And I think you got to fail sometimes 20 times to succeed once. And I think that's some of the things that some of the stories that today might seem comical. They weren't so comical when they happened. But I think these are some of the stories that we can share about, it's all about the perseverance and persistence of overcoming these obstacles and being the individual that just said no to fail and kept going and kept trying, repeated efforts to get to perfection as best we could, and engaging the right people, and going through the whole entrepreneurial pathway that led to success.
I think you're absolutely right. When you talk about failure, I've always said to the students that I've spoken to over the years, or to even my team members, because we've had a lot of failure, there's no question, but I've always looked at failure as a stepping stone to success. If you have no failure, it's virtually impossible to have any success. It's what you do with what you learn from these failures. And most importantly, never quitting. There's such a fine line between success and failure. I call it like the 10% line, because we're always on the edge of failure. But having said that, we're always on the edge of success. It's a very, very important thing to remember. And it's something that when an entrepreneur is going through the stress and the issues that we've gone through, to remember that never quit attitude is critical.
100%. And I had many tear-filled evenings and days where my body and my mind were breaking apart. And I was at that point, that very fine line between success and failure that you're referring to as the 10%, where you're ready to throw in the towel. And I think if we do nothing else in this series, if we can just convey the idea to the future entrepreneur that we've been through this. And I think that's the biggest thing. One of the biggest problems with entrepreneurs today is they have no one to talk to. It can be a very lonely world out there when you're trying to explain to people what you're going through, and really only a fellow entrepreneur can understand. So hopefully we can convey some of those experiences and talk about these tough times that we had. It's real easy to talk about your successes, but conveying the failures and conveying the heartache that we went through to get to success, and having the ability for someone to listen to those repeatedly in these modules will hopefully inspire them to persevere, hopefully inspire them to keep going. And as you said earlier, most importantly, inspire them to never, ever quit.
That is so critical, with all the aspiring entrepreneurs. And I also invite, startup entrepreneurs who are going through issues in their existing businesses and going through all the trials and tribulations that we've been through, and we've been through it multiple times, to know that there is success in the future, but you just have to keep on pursuing. And sometimes you have to take a look, and you got to say, maybe the course that I'm on needs an adjustment. Maybe I got to just adjust it instead of continuing the way I'm going. But I call that a refinement process. And I also call it, you kind of have to, if you're a perfectionist, I've always found that perfectionists have a totally different way of looking at entrepreneurship than guys like you and I. I take a look, and I think there's a lot of trial and failure. You try, you fail, you get up, you dust off yourself, and you keep on going. But you never lose sight that you're going to make it. And of course, when you do make it, you never even know it. You don't even know when you achieve success. Because success is always fleeting. Just as you think you've got it, it keeps on. It's a never-ending target. So I'm hopeful that all the aspiring entrepreneurs and the new entrepreneurs are going to watch our video. This is going to catapult them to tremendous success. And I look forward to sharing our insights.
I'm exceedingly excited about this, Joel, and I think being able to share these stories and as you said, it's success is just always something you're reaching for. It's something you should never feel you achieve. It's just something. It's an ongoing project that something that you want to aspire to all the time. And you have to keep in mind that every time you're succeeding, there's somebody else out there who will find, some way of doing it cheaper, faster, better. And you always have to be on your toes. And just when you've hit success, and this is one of the things we'll talk about, this is one of the areas, just as you think you're successful and you think you can plateau, is a time where you get hit with the next the next competitor, the next product or service that's out there that's going to replace you. And you don't have to go much further than to people like Kodak or BlackBerry to ask that question. So you can have success comes at many different ranges. You can be a big success, you can be a medium or small success, but at every level, it's attacked unless you stay on your toes. So success isn't something you want to achieve, it's something you always want to aspire to.
So unlike, the academic process where kids go to school and they learn about accounting and they learn about marketing and they learn all things about software, we're going to offer them not only that, but a combination of the school of hard knocks and the reality of what entrepreneurs really go through. I remember, when I was in school and I'd be listening to my professors and they were doing the best job they possibly could. But when I heard them talking about entrepreneurship, the first thing that went through my mind, have they ever started a company? And in most cases, In most cases, certainly not in all cases, but in many of the cases, they hadn't. I wanted to hear from guys that or ladies who have actually gone through the process. They've been in the boat, they paddled their way to creating great entities, and now they're prepared to share. That's what we're going to do. We're going to share our stories with you. And I encourage you to watch all 12 modules. We're going to have a lot of fun, and hopefully along the way, you'll be emailing us all kinds of questions and insights that you have as entrepreneurs, and we're going to do our best to share our stories with you.
Absolutely. And Joel, your story about your sitting in school resonates so much with me, because I remember listening to my professors and, occasionally listening to consultants. And I was reminded by a good friend of mine who did a presentation many, many years ago in the 80s. And he always described a consultant as a guy who knew 101 ways to ski down a hill, just didn't own any skis.
Isn't that true? That's absolutely true. But guys, I want to tell all those aspiring entrepreneurs out there, this is going to be a storyboard, a fun masterclass that we're going to share with you. And we really look forward to your participation and your enjoyment. And most importantly, we want you, if you can learn just a few important things that we're going to share, these few things can catapult you to extreme success. But remember, success is fleeting, so you're always going to have to be on your toes. Well, let's get going and let's start moving and sharing our masterclass with aspiring entrepreneurs. Okay, Marty, this is amazing. We are now starting our first module. This is module 1 for all those aspiring entrepreneurs. I'm Joelmatlin, and the co-host, Marty Copeland. Marty, say hi to all those aspiring entrepreneurs out there.
Hi, everybody. Great to have you aboard.
I can't believe we're doing this, but I'm thrilled to be doing this. Marty, we've been through a lot as entrepreneurs. There's no question about it. But having said that, how did you become an entrepreneur? How'd you start off?
Well, it's a great question, Joel. And in my particular case, and I'm sure others will have been through this. It was a bit of a personal. It started out as a very personal issue, which I'm happy to share with the audience, in that I went through some real trauma at an early stage in my life. And unfortunately, my oldest brother, who at the time was 26, and I was in first year university at the University of Toronto, passed away from cancer, and obviously had a huge effect on our family and me in particular. I felt that time became a lot more valuable to me. I judged time very differently at that point, because I realized that watching my brother having his life taken away so early, it propelled me to want to do something much faster, much sooner, and of much greater importance. So I had this burning desire to go out and become an entrepreneur. Even though I was in first year university, I had this burning desire to go and be an entrepreneur. And well, I always had that, probably from an early stage in my life. Sometimes it's a piece of trauma in your life that casts you into a different situation and forges you to go forward and look to be successful in some aspect somewhere. In my case, it was entrepreneurship. At the time when this happened, ironically enough, and again, another thing I'll share with everybody out there, I believe that everything happens for a reason. I really believe that things happen for a reason. I do believe in karma. I do believe that things happen for a reason. And in my particular case, right around that time, my father, who ran a fairly large chemical engineering business, was invited as a guest speaker in Chicago to do a keynote presentation at their annual convention. That was later, a little bit in the summertime. And he came back with an audio cassette from this conference of his speech. And one of my other loves happened to be technology, and in particular audio. And he brought me back this cassette tape of his speech. And he said, take a listen to this. So I listened to his speech and I went, wow, that's amazing. I said, how did you get a cassette copy of your speech? And so quickly you just came back home. And he said, well, there's this company there and they recorded everything. And they had instant tapes basically afterwards of my speech. And they gave me a complimentary copy. And I thought, this is a great business. And knowing that I wanted to get into business, he came back with the idea. So the idea actually didn't come from me. It came from my father. And I'm very grateful to this day for that. But at that time, he was still an advocate of, you know, if you want something, you go out there and do it. I had the type of father who was very supportive, but he wasn't going to do it for me. So we did fly down to Chicago the next day, literally almost the next day, met with the company in Chicago. We secured the rights for North America to start the business and began to do business up here. And the irony was that when we did our first conference, keep in mind at the time I was 19 years old. I went and recorded my first conference, and it was actually the International Taxi Cab Association. So you'd sit there and go, you know, who are these guys? Well, these are owners of taxi cab companies. They're quite successful entrepreneurs. So they had their annual meeting in Toronto in September of 1975, went and recorded the meeting. And in a period of 2 days, just 2 days, we did sales of $2,400 of tapes. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money today. But in 1975, number one, that's a lot of money. And when you're 19 years old, it's like $1 billion, right? So I realized at that time, as did my father and my mother, that we had a business. And then I was very, very fortunate to have great family support, tremendous family support. My father was always there as a guider, as a guideline, as a mentor. I didn't use too much of his time because he was still running his own business. But I would ask him questions. And quite frankly, as Joe alluded to in the introduction that you may have listened to, is I relied a lot on my father's friends who were also experienced age people. And I began to realize the same magic as you did, Joel, in that there's a great amount of experience in people who are older than you. And my father's friends at that time were in their late 50s, early 60s. And I relied very heavily. I spoke to quite a few of them. I would ask them, what they would do, et cetera, et cetera. And I used that guidance in order to propel my business forward. And that's basically how I got into the business. We secured the Canadian rights. The final part of the story is that just a few years later, the person who I had secured the rights from actually decided to take a job in another completely different industry. And he offered me the ability to expand my business in the United States. In other words, take his business over. And I was so young at the time that, and this is part of the reason I expressed this, is never be afraid. But I was afraid at that time. So I made the mistake of saying, thank you, but no thank you. I'm happy with what I have in Canada. And I declined his invitation and ended up just being this Audio Archives of Canada, operating in Canada. And he just shut down his business. And it wasn't until almost 7 or 8 years later that another opportunity, which I'll talk about later on in another module, came along to actually open up in the US. And although I regretted not opening initially, 7 years later, when I was a little older, a little more mature, I took advantage of that opportunity. So that's how I got started, Joel. And I'd love to hear how you got started.
My story is quite similar, but as a youngster, I sort of looked at the group of people around me. I said there were kind of like leaders and there were followers. And I always looked at myself as a leader. And I can't honestly say that was academically, but I found with people, I considered myself a leader. And growing up, I also took a look around. In my particular family, there was a lot of entrepreneurs, not necessarily running large companies, but they were self-created business people. And I looked at them and I noticed that most of them had a pretty good lifestyle. I said, I'd like to have a good lifestyle. What does it take? And when I was younger, and I continue to do it to this day, is I take in what's happening around me. And I realized at a very, very young age, I didn't want to be a doctor I didn't want to be a lawyer. I should have been a lawyer, but I didn't want to be a lawyer at that time. Would have saved a lot of money on litigation. But having said that, I realized that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. My problem was, though, I didn't know what business. So as it started off, I got a job. I was in university, actually, and my greatest disappointment, and I want all entrepreneurs out there to listen to me and to listen to me carefully. Just because I've done it a certain way doesn't mean that I suggest you do it. I landed up going to university for 2 years. I went to a university in Montreal in commerce. But my goal, even when I went to university, was how can I start my own company? I was fixated with the idea, but I didn't know what. So I went through a couple of companies in various very, very low positions in the shipping room, doing menial tasks. And every day when I used to go to these companies, I would laugh. I'd laugh at myself. I'd say, Joel, can you believe what you're doing? And I say, well, just give me a chance to figure out what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to move on that idea. And sure enough, within a year of having a couple of menial jobs, which I detested, but I sort of took it in good humor, I decided that, you know what, the time had come for me to get a professional job. So I took a look at the newspaper, and I saw a job for a company looking for photocopier salespeople. Photocopier salespeople. I said to myself, I know nothing about that. And I said, that's the beautiful part, not knowing about things and having a willingness to learn. Needless to say, they hired me. But I must say to everybody, and I want to be perfectly honest about this, I think they would have hired anybody at that time. They were so short of salespeople. But having said that, I was excited because I was going to sell a product, an actual piece of machinery that I knew nothing about. And I quickly learned there were 3 components to the business. One, it was equipment sales. 2, it was supply costs, because they had electrostatic paper, which I know most of you listening don't even know what electrostatic paper is, but it was a coated type of paper that was used in photocopiers and subsequently fax machines. And then what they did is they sold service contracts. So these 3 concepts marinated in my brain. And as we're going to talk about later on in all of our modules, I'm going to give you more insight to how these 3 components stayed with me through my whole career. Now, Marty, we're taking a look at entrepreneurship. We have all of these young aspiring entrepreneurs that are listening to us. They're trying to see what we did to start. What was your greatest obstacle in starting off in the early days?
I think the greatest obstacle for me was knowledge of what it took to grow a business. I'm sure, like you, we went into this thinking that we could do this relatively quickly. We could do this with, it was going to be relatively easy because we're pretty young and pretty energetic, and at young ages we think we know everything. I think if there's anything I could express to other entrepreneurs out there is that it's amazing how much we don't know and how much you learn, and that you have to always be learning, like right to the end. You have to have a real thirst for knowledge. So I think that was my biggest obstacle, is just it was knowledge and not understanding what it was going to take to truly chase success. And
would you say, Marty, that the fact of what you didn't know served you well? Because if you would have known, you might have been scared to continue on. Is that a possibility?
I completely agree, Joel. I think had I known maybe what I was going to go through, is that I may not have. And I think being a little bit ignorant, and that doesn't mean stupid, I just mean ignorant. It's a different definition there. But being ignorant and not knowing was actually a huge advantage back then, because we went into things not really understanding what the consequences may be, because for every action there's a consequence. And I think had we maybe known what it would be, we may be inclined not to rush so quickly.
But wouldn't you agree that, the one thing that I think is very important in entrepreneurship is being able to take that step into the unknown, open the door to a part of the world that you have no idea where it's going to take you. But a lot of people, most people, don't have the guts, the courage to open the door. But when you open the door and you take that first step, even though you don't know all the steps to successful entrepreneurship, how could you? But you do one step at a time. And it's that ability to push yourself beyond to the unknown. Would you agree on that?
Joel, yeah, I totally. And I think, in fact, what we adopted within our company, it took several years to, figure this all out. But our number one rule in our company was no fear. That was our number one rule. We had 10 rules within the company, but our number one rule was no fear. And I think, as one of the things about being an entrepreneur is, everybody's going to be a bit risk averse. There's no question about it. Risk is a tough thing to manage, but I think this concept of no fear is incredibly important. So one of the nuggets that we certainly want to leave our listeners with in module 1 is this concept of no fear. You cannot operate. It's like anything you do in life. If even if you ever watch a sports contest and someone's a little nervous or they have a little bit of fear, it's okay to have a little bit, but you really have to operate with no fear and complete confidence. And you learn as you go. It is a bit of trial and error for sure.
It's interesting that you were talking about no fear. And while you were talking about, what struck me, went through my mind, is there's a tremendous parallel with confidence, which you just said at the end of the talk. So I take a look and I say, I think you're 100% right. Confidence is so critical, because if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to project, and you're going to tell other people about your idea, about your proposed vision, if you don't say it in the most confident style possible, you will not get any success. You will not convince the people that need to follow you as a leader. So you have to show confidence, even though deep down, there's a great degree of uncertainty. You will always have uncertainty, but you need to demonstrate an incredible degree of confidence. I remember when I was starting off, my first company, which was Frisco Bay Industries. And I started off in the video end of the business. And I remember we had no money. We had absolutely no money. I will tell you about later how I started the partnership, which is in itself is an interesting story. But I remember going into a tobacco manufacturer, Rothmans, and we had nothing. We had absolutely no money at all. And we were trying to create some capital to come into the company. So what we were going to do, we were going to do a sales training seminar, offer the equipment to the tobacco company, which happened to be Rothmans at the time. So I went in with my partner and I said, I got to tell you one thing. Do me one favor. Please do not say a word. He said, Joel, no problem. And we went in. We went to the meeting with the general manager. His name at the time was Roland, a real quality guy. And they wanted a certain type of video technology for their sales seminar that they were having. And I just listened to what he had, remembering, of course, that we had zero equipment. We had no equipment at all. And he said to me, could we do this? And could we do that? And I looked him straight in the eye. I said, this is absolutely no problem. This is right to what we can do. We'd be more than happy to supply you with whatever you need. And we'll prepare a proposal and we'll get back to you. And I remember vividly in my mind, we went back a few years, and we walked out of the building. And my partner said to me, he said, Joel, how are you possibly going to make that happen? I said, Barry, watch me. We will do it. It's the power of believing. And subsequently, what we did, we got suppliers of the equipment, and they happened to be actually equipment vendors, wholesalers, who loaned us the equipment at absolutely no charge for the sales seminar. So it's the magic of believing. It's putting yourself out there and realizing one thing. This is probably one of the best things that I've ever remembered, is that when you have no risk, how could you have any risk at all? In other words, I had nothing to lose. What is the worst thing that could have happened to me? I could have walked out of the meeting, same thing could have transpired, and I could have picked up the phone and call up the people at the tobacco company and say, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, we can't provide. But we were able to provide it, and we got enough capital, not a significant amount, but enough capital to start the first company.
You know, Joel, it's so interesting, the parallels here in your story and mine, in that very similarly, I remember my first office that I had consisted of the old TV tables, which were basically a piece of laminate on two pieces of aluminum. And I had a Yellow Pages phone book to look up, clients, potential business clients. And I had a phone, and that was it. And that was my desk at those days, a pen and a pad of paper. And I can remember sitting there. We got our first client. I made about 4 or 5 phone calls, got our first client, made another 10 or 15 phone calls, got our second client. And I began to understand that the whole concept of failure, you had to phone 10 people or 20 people to get one person. And I realized it was a numbers game. So I realized I could sit and just be depressed about it. But when you put in your head, the idea was, don't focus on the yeses, don't focus on the success, focus on the failure. I knew if I could get 19 people to say no, I was good with the 20th one who was going to say yes. So I started focusing on just make 60 calls today or 40 calls today, and you'll get 2 new clients. And that's exactly what happened. I just focused on making the first 19. And when the 20th happened, I didn't get overly excited about it. I just expected, the 20th is going to be yes. And the interesting thing was, when I say parallel to your story, is I remember getting about 5 or 6 clients, and I only had enough equipment basically to do 1 or 2 clients. And I just remember I rented this office from a cousin of mine, and I went out to my cousin. I said to him, I said, I just don't know what I'm going to do at this stage. He said, well, what's your problem? I said, I've been too successful. I have too much business. And my cousin looked at me, and he's about 20 years older. And he looked at me, he said, let me give you your first business lesson. And I said, what's that? He says, go and get the sales and then worry about how to look after them. And I've lived by that, every day of my life since that time. I was only 19 at the time. And I always went out and said, you know what, go and get the sales. And if your biggest problem in business is how to execute on them, you've got a very good problem. The opposite problem, when you don't have enough sales, you don't have to worry about executing. So the key thing here is to execute. Another friend of mine wrote a book called Execute or Be Executed, right? Key thing to business is to execute. And when you put yourself in this kind of problematic situation where you have more business than you can manage, that's the challenge of the entrepreneur, is to figure out how to do it and how to do it well. Obviously, you don't want to end up doing having so much that you do a bad job for everybody, and you can also put yourself out of business that way. But a reasonable amount of overkill on the sales side is a really good thing. And it's a challenge, Joel, like you said, when you have you promise somebody something and then you have to figure out how to deliver it later. But alluding back to the conversation we had at the beginning of this call, we talked about things being easy and things being difficult. And I can remember, my parents saying to me, if it was easy, everybody be doing it. It's not easy. It's difficult. So, your other nugget here is that entrepreneurship is a very tough thing. It's a tough thing emotionally, mentally, physically to go through. It's not easy. But remember, entrepreneurship is, if it was easy, everybody just be doing it. It's not easy. So you have to stand out amongst everybody else through perseverance and persistence. And that no quit attitude that Joel alluded to earlier, to be able to continue the chase towards, success, understanding that success or complete success is never attainable. You look at all the top-notch entrepreneurs today, they're starting new businesses, they're evolving their businesses, they are innovating, but more importantly, the real top entrepreneurs today are doing things like disrupting industries. And we'll talk, I'm sure, more about that in other modules. But disrupting an industry is another really important thing to think about when you're trying to think about, as an entrepreneur, what to do in the future.
Just to continue on, one of the aspects that you brought up is I recall when I was starting off, and it's amazing how you have to push yourself. And you'd be knocking on doors, whether you're making phone calls as you did, or whether you were actually making live visual calls with potential customers. And I remember I would, go into somebody's store to sell them some technology that we had, and they would be very abusive to me. Please get out of my store. I'm not interested. And I'd walk out and I'd say to myself, wow, I can't believe he said that to me, or that she said that to me. And then I thought about it. I said, they don't even know me. Why would I take something personal when they don't even know me? If they really knew who I was and it was a personal slight at me, then I might be disturbed about it. So I called that temporary. Instead of calling it refusal, I called it temporary refusal. They're saying to me, what you have for me today, I'm not interested, but I might be interested tomorrow. So I would return tomorrow. And I'd return the next day. And sooner or later, they became a customer of mine. So it's a mindset. It's an attitude of not taking any negativity personal, but taking it and saying, how could I use it to motivate myself, to go beyond? Because most people, and this is so important to you entrepreneurs listening, you aspiring guys out there and ladies, remember one thing, that most people will take it personally and they're going to quit. But you're going to learn. You're not going to take it personally. You're going to get up. You're going to be motivated and say, just because that person gave me temporary refusal, I'm going to go out and I'm going to sell more.
Joel, I think you're very much alluding to one of my favorite topics, which is dealing with rejection. And I think we could probably do a whole module on rejection, but which we will at some point get into in the later modules. But dealing with rejection is, again, one of the primary things that an entrepreneur has to overcome. People saying no to you. And again, I think it's a mindset. And as we talked about earlier, is that if you look at those 19 people, as saying of rejecting you, first of all, you can't take it personally, as you said, Joel. You have to take it professionally. They're not rejecting you. They're maybe rejecting your product or service. So that's number one. Number two is that if you look at those 19 individuals that are saying no to you as rejection and refusal, it can be very, very demotivating. It can really, really, like you said, Joel, it could make you just want to say, hang up your hat and just go and get a job somewhere. You really can. And it is that person, that entrepreneur, that understands what those 19 rejections are. And if you can turn the tables on that, like that's the magic, turning the tables on it, is when you go out as an entrepreneur to sell, and this is one of the nuggets you really have to think about. When you go out as an entrepreneur to sell, look at those 19 as things that you want to get. So the whole idea is have a mindset that I'm going out today to get 19 rejections. That's what I want to accomplish. Because getting the yes, getting the 20th one that says yes, that's the easy part. Handling those 19 rejections is the tough part. So if you go out with a mindset and you say to yourself, my job today is to get 19 people to say no. I'm not going to worry about the yes. The yes is going to happen on the 20th person. So if you turn this around and sort of say, I'm not going to get that excited about the yes, I'm going to get excited about the no's, because 19 no's is that one, each no that I get is one more step to my yes. So if you go about it that way, you're going to be actually excited to go out there and get no's. And entrepreneurship, it's all about excitement. It's all about passion. So when I was training salespeople that were working for us, they thought I was crazy. I said, I don't want you getting sales. I want you to get all rejection. I want you to go out there and get as many no's as you can. And they look at me and say, look, man, Martin, have you lost your marbles? I said, no, the yeses will look after themselves. Just focus today. Your job today is to get as many no's as you can, because the more no's you get, it means the more yeses we're going to get as a company. So just focus on getting the no's. And by the way, celebrate them. At the end of the day, we're going to go out for dinner, and I want you to tell me about how many no's you got. I don't even care about your yeses. Just tell me about how many no's, because based on the number of no's that you get, I already know how many yeses you got. And so I think if you look at that as an opportunity and a way in which to excite and ignite yourself, you can turn rejection into complete success and a really happy way of living your life. And so that's what we did. And I'm sure, Joel, you went through the same type of thing, and you already described in your last story very similar type of experience that I did.
The interesting thing is, when you come up with your idea, we're going to talk about ideas, and we're going to talk about branding. We're going to talk about, deciding on a name. But what's so important when you're starting off in the early days, and you're going to land up following through on this forever and ever and ever, it's the power of association. Who you associate with. You're going to go to your friends, and I don't know if it's the best thing, and you're going to say to your friends, I've been thinking about this idea and I want to start a business. Well, you're going to expect, I want to tell you from my experience, you're going to get a great degree of negativity. So the key is to make sure that the people that you select to tell your ideas to, that you're prepared for their response, whether it be negative or whether it be positive. And I honestly suggest that, yes, the negative ones may not be telling you the response you want in the true frame. And I'll tell you why, because a lot of people are jealous of entrepreneurs. They're jealous of new ideas. So you've got to be very selective who you put on your support team, who you talk to about your ideas, and most importantly, the impact that it has on you to move forward. Because a lot of people come up with great ideas. They tell their friends, they tell their relatives, whoever they might be, their relatives disagree with it, and the idea is killed. So you have to be very strong in your commitment of your idea, and the people that you select to tell you that you are strong enough to take the good from what they say and move forward with your idea. Don't be the one who quits. Be the one who says, against what you might have told me about that idea, look at how well we've done.
Joel, it's a great thought, and it reminds me, that it's estimated these days that most people, the average person, usually has about 200 people in their network. And the interesting part is I always use the 80-20 rule, in this case, probably more like the 95-5 rule. And that is, if you're successful and you have this network of 200 people, you'll know who your real friends are, because 190 of them, if you really ask them, or if they're talking amongst themselves, will probably be very jealous and very upset that you've been successful. And usually you can count on less than 2 hands the number of people who will really truly be excited for you. Often it's your immediate family, and usually your closest 2 or 3 friends. But those are the people, the ones that hurt when you hurt and are happy when you're happy. Those are the real people in your life. The other 190 are visitors. They're good to hang around with sometimes, have some fun with. But usually there's that jealousy, that envy, and almost that the jealousy to the point where your success is almost inversely proportional to their like of it. So the more successful you get, the worse they feel. A lot of people, are very happy when you don't succeed, because it makes them feel better about themselves. And that's that 190 group. So I think one of the other nuggets we're talking about here today is be careful who you associate with, and be careful who you ask opinion of, and be careful who you use as your mentors. I would also, at this point, again, I think just another nugget, really encourage an entrepreneur to potentially look at joining these smaller associations of entrepreneurs, whether it's through the Chamber of Commerce or other associations. hang out with other people who are struggling just like you. I know for me, probably one of my short story I can share with you is I remember when I started out and I was in, I think, my second or third year of operation. And I remember getting a call from a guy by the name of Todd Coombs, not important really on this particular module, the name, but Todd Coombs owned a company called Chesapeake, and they were the big company. They were the big American company in my space. Everybody knew them. They had all the big accounts. And he actually called me up and he said, hey, we're starting a small association of companies that do what we do. There's only about maybe 15 or 20 of us. But, you know, we'd like to have an annual meeting and get together and compare ideas. Well, I right away got my back and thought, oh, this guy, you know, he's just calling me, he's going to steal all my good ideas. Because I thought, I know more than everybody else. Who would know what I know? I'm the perfectionist. I know it all. I'm going to end up giving all my trade secrets away. And these people are going to steal it. My competition is going to steal everything away. So he said to me, I sensed some reluctancy on the phone. Why don't I send you an audio cassette? That's what we used to record on those of our last meeting. You can listen to it and decide if you want to join. So I listened to this audio cassette, which was on marketing, and my mouth kind of dropped open and wow, that's a great idea. This is a great idea. And everyone all of a sudden was sharing these ideas and we were competitors, right? And after listening to this tape, it took me about, a millisecond. I picked up the phone, I phoned Todd and I said, I'm in. I'm going to be the first Canadian guy. I'm joining the association. When's our next meeting, which was in January. I went down, and I will tell you that that particular group was maybe one of the most keys, one of the cornerstones of my success, because actually by participating with my competitors in the same organization, I learned more than I could have anywhere else, including university. I just learned a ton of stuff, and I made a ton of friends. And it was amazing how much all of a sudden we started helping each other out. And and the good companies in particular, and the real entrepreneurs, we started helping each other out. And we got more engaged in making our industry important. Along with our business, we thought about the idea of our industry has to be important, and there's enough business out there for all of us. So we all work together, even as competitors. And some of my best references, some of my best referrals actually came from my competitors. So that's just another little nugget you can use.
Of course, that happens as you grow your opportunity. But I think in the early days, something that I found very helpful, and I'm sure, our viewers will find the same thing, is that I looked for successful entrepreneur books to read. And for the most part, a lot of books are quite repetitious about the same ideas. But I tell you, you can never hear these good ideas too much, because we all listen, but we don't always apply. So reading on entrepreneurship, reading about successful people is a wonderful way of motivating yourself to greater heights. And that's why we're here to help you reach your goals and become a very successful entrepreneur. And we're going to get ready for our next module. So we're going to close off this module. It's been great chatting today, and we are thrilled to have you as part of our masterclass on entrepreneurship. Anything you want to add, Marty?
We are just delighted to be here, and our only mission is to see you be successful and maximize on any aspect of success that you can find, and elevate you to the level where at the end of your day, you'll be like Joel and I sitting around, hopefully mentoring the next group of successful entrepreneurs into the future.
See you at the next module.